Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How's it going?
How you doing, JK? You well?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, good. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, man. Not bad. I think Rush has joined us.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum, guys.
Wa alaikum
Walaikum
assalam.
assalam.
So just waiting on brother Cam. Yes,
Yeah.
you're gonna say something, Rush.
Yeah, he's going to join in a bit. I think he was just on the road. I spoke to him a couple of minutes ago.
No worries, man. Well, obviously, before he joins, we might as well have a bit of a chat. And you mentioned him being on the road, and just want to ask the question really, if whether you guys have topped up your petrol.
I'm quite fortunate, actually. I've got an electric car, so I'm not in this trouble that most people are in. Having said that, though, the petrol stations are crazy around here. They're literally all of them. I don't know how bad it is in Derby and Nuneaton and places like that, but it's not been good around here at all.
Yeah,
It's not bad, but yeah, there's a lot of, you have to wait for a long time to get some petrol.
No, but that is bad though, isn't it, JK? I mean, it's somewhere where it normally takes a few minutes. I mean, around locally around here, the amount of traffic I've seen at the local stations, I'm not even talking about the big ones. It's madness. It's crazy, and it's strange how a rumor can get people so paranoid that they behave in a certain way. Humans are very unique creatures, man. You know how we respond. Have you ever seen this experiment where there's basically these people they're sitting in a like a doctor surgery, right?
Oh, yeah.
And one person comes in and all the other guys they're in on the trick, and what they do is I think there's something like there's as soon as there's a beep or something, everyone stands up, right? And then they sit down, and then this person's watching. After a bit, for no reason, for no actual real reason, what they do is they start copying. They start copying.
Yeah, he starts copying them. He starts standing up as well, but
He
not
starts
knowing
standing
what
up.
the reason behind it is, other than to conform with everybody else.
I'll tell you another one. Another experiment I saw once. It's like a canteen at a college or something, and basically the fire alarm bell goes off, right? And what they see is that nobody wants to get up first, so everyone's looking, waiting for someone else to get up first, and then they'll walk out. So it's crazy. I mean, a lot of people are coming out from, obviously as normal. It happens where people have their sort of conspiracy theory spin on stuff. Some people are saying that during the lockdown there was a surplus of fuel because no one was topping up, and it has a sort of a shelf life to it. So what's the best way of getting it all used up?
That's the first one I've heard. Yeah, no, what I've been hearing around here locally, which is the sad reality, really, is that and again, there's a little group in our area on Facebook group, and people have been posting on there going that there's people who are like carers, people who are hospital staff, people who are really in dire need of fuel to get to work, doing critical jobs. They're struggling to get fuel because other people are being really inconsiderate and literally taking much more than they need and hoarding it, just so that they're just thinking about themselves in a very, very selfish way. And it just made me think about just the type of mentality the current societies have become under living in this very individualistic and capitalist society. And that really came about when I read a few of these posts on this Facebook page, and a lot of people were really disappointed. But at the same time, there was plenty of people who didn't really care. They were like, I need it. I'm gonna look after myself first.
Yeah. The thing is, Rush, what you gotta understand is, humans by themselves, collectively, without a system, they can't organize themselves, right? Now, in the West, you look in the East, you look at a lot of these countries in Africa or a lot of Muslim lands, and when you visit there, it seems like chaos. No one queues up. It's just crazy. Even the way they drive, it's like it's like Fast and Furious, I mean, every single day, right? But the thing is, though, what you got to understand is that's because a lot of those are broken down societies where the systems are being imposed on them by some dictatorship. It's just chaos, right? People don't really believe in the system. They don't follow the rules, and you see that, right? But then the thing is, when you look in the West, you see order. You see, people stop at red lights, at, traffic lights and stuff like this, and it's all good. But the moment the people stop believing in that, or they have a greater reason to do something than following the rules, then what you'll see chaos, because it will be each for their own. So some of these are signs really that show that if you have a system, it's organized, but if it breaks down and people basically are resorted to just looking after themselves, like you said, they're not going to consider the fact that there's people out there who are care workers. They need to get to their clients, old people, especially with the prices of energy going up. There's a lot of people they're forecasting. A lot of people are just going to die in their homes, older people, because they can't afford to pay the bill, right? So, but people don't think about this, bro. It's just the way it is, man.
Sad reality.
Yeah, and you wonder that. Assalamu alaikum, by the way. Sorry for joining. Yeah, and you wonder that in Lebanon currently, that's the real fuel crisis. There's not this artificial fuel crisis just because there's some shortages with some I don't know, some HGV drivers. The real fuel crisis in the Middle East, where they've left in such a state, and people, not even just the normal person on the street obviously can't get oil, but even big businesses can't get oil, and they're having to go onto the black market to get oil to even just continue some of their businesses, and most of them are just shut down and hitting the economy. But that's where the real issues are at the moment in the world for fuel, and that's all artificial as well, because it's being chokeholded by the West to cause that economic sort of decline in certain countries.
Yeah, definitely, man. That's why there's a saying that some people use. It's first world problems. My manager used to use that. Like I think around the pandemic and all the people fighting over toilet paper and stuff, and people they were calling it first world problems, like comparing it to places out there who have other issues. Comparing to them, the problems that you have, it really is, first world, in the sense like it's nowhere near the suffering that other people around the world are going through.
Who needs tissues when you've got water?
Yeah, bro, exactly, man. I wish I'd invested in some lotte. Those I don't even know how to even a plastic cup to use in the toilet, but but yeah, man. It's we'll see what happens. We'll see. I'm sure the government's saying there's enough fuel, so I'm sure everything will go back to normal. But it is what it is, isn't it? Just be like Rush and get an electric car sorted.
Yes, that's the way forward, isn't it?
Cool, man.
Until we run out of electricity as well.
Well, yeah, if that happens, bro, then we got big problems.
We won't be talking like this anymore. Anyway,
yeah, we won't be talking exactly. No, exactly. We won't be talking. We won't be on the internet. And as a final point, I do remember a while back I was watching this like series on. It might have been on Amazon Prime or Netflix, and it was where one day all electricity just goes from the world, and then fast forward like 5 years, and they it's like the Wild West. They got horses again and stuff like that. So it was quite interesting, but cool. Listen, let's get into some of the segments that we want to chat about today. The first segment is something which I think is close to all of our hearts, all the Muslim hearts. The first story, I know in the What's Happening in Muslims podcast show, we normally tend to go over stuff that's been going on the last week or so. But what I've noticed is in the last week or so, there has been a little bit of noise in regards to our sister, Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, in regards to people calling for her freedom, people calling for America to allow her to leave the prison and head back to Pakistan. So I wanted to speak a bit about this because it is something which a lot of Muslims are talking about. And for those people who don't know, Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, she is a Pakistani neuroscientist. She was a mother. Well, she's a mother of three. Even though I think one child died, one child is missing, and there's only the whereabouts of her oldest son is known. But basically, she disappeared off the scene in 2003. And in 2008, she was arrested in Afghanistan, in Bagram, and some story was made up of her trying to attack some American soldiers, and basically, she was then taken back to America, and she's been there for now. But now that a story is being coming out, a lot's been revealed, is the fact that the years between 2003 and 2008. She was actually, being locked up by the Americans, and the stories are horrific. The accounts are horrific of her being raped daily. Even she was forced to walk on the Quran and loads of stuff. And even Yvonne Ridley speaks about that. There was an account of a woman in Bagram for 5 years or so. And she thinks it was Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, even though the Americans say, well, they don't know where she was, and she was arrested in 2008. But brothers, what I want to sort of get your thoughts on really is that why this story touches a lot of Muslim hearts is the fact that here what you have is a Muslim woman who was kidnapped. In fact, who was handed over by the Musharraf regime to the Americans for money, and her ordeal is, terrible, horrific of what happened to her. And why a lot of people, Muslims, are angry about this is because in Islam we have a concept of honor, certainly for sisters. And when you hear the story of how this how this sister has been abused and is still being abused, and being handed an 86-year sentence in America, is something which frustrates a lot of Muslims, because they want to do something, but they feel like they can't, or whatever they've tried isn't working. So I'm sure you guys have looked into this story before, and I'm sure you guys know about Dr. Aafia Siddiqui. But what's your thoughts on this issue, especially since it sort of resurfaced in the last week or so?
Yeah, there was apparently a global Twitter storm, not just in the UK but around the world. Basically, hashtag free Aafia Siddiqui Twitter storm. I'm not sure what led to it, but I mean, yeah, I think there's a positive in that the Ummah, like you said, genuinely is close to this case, the sad case of Aafia Siddiqui and what she's been through since 2003, really. But yeah, in terms of her background, she was, like I said, she's a neuroscientist, and she was very intelligent. I think there's quite a few videos of her doing some speeches in her what do you call? They call them MSAs, which is essentially like ISOC in the US. So she was very well thought of and very intelligent as well. And people knew of her even before kind of she was kidnapped. But yeah, it just highlights, and this is just one case of many. That's the reality of it. This is one sister of many sisters that have been dishonored and tortured in whether it be Bagram and other secret prisons around the world. But for me, the real thing that it highlights is I think the Ummah feels as though, and ourselves included, we feel a bit helpless in that this is our honor, this is our, we're unable to protect our sisters. And I saw this recently. Apparently she had a dream of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she basically, to paraphrase, I don't have it in front of me, but basically, she asked the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, why is Allah testing me like this for the amount of intense torture and all the stuff she's been through? What is it? Why is Allah testing me like this? And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in her dream, she says, responded to say that, in fact, this is a test for the Ummah. to see to see whether the Ummah will basically come to your aid and protection. So really, that itself is very hard hitting, because it really shows that what it is telling of the Ummah is our duty to be able to protect our sisters, including Aafia Siddiqui. And that doesn't mean going and trying to find her, but in fact thinking about how Islam requires us to protect our women and the honor of our women, and what we need to do to take action to help Aafia Siddiqui, as well as every other sister that has been dishonored. There's many stories in the Islamic history that speaks of sisters being dishonored, but actually the action that the leaders of the time took was decisive, whereas today there's silence. So yeah, very, very difficult case to really speak about, but that's the reality.
But just to add to that, it's not even that it's silence. She was handed over.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know about the what's his name? I forgot his name. Khurshid, I think basically he worked under Musharraf, the guy with the Pakistani intelligence, and when he retired, he said basically that one thing he regrets in his time is for handing over innocent. He says innocent Aafia Siddiqui to the Americans. It was my biggest mistake ever. His name was Khurshid Kasuri. He was the former foreign minister of Pakistan under Musharraf. So they know they did it. They deliberately did this.
Yeah.
It ties in with the 20-year anniversary that we're talking about recently. The fact that the war on terror, our sister, she got caught up in it, because what has happened is that Cage have done a really good I think like a document on this, where all of the things that they speculate that she was involved in are all just bogus. They're all things that it just so happened that at a time when they wanted to create fear mongering towards Muslims, due to 9/11 and things like that, they needed people to put people in a situation where they could tell their masses that, look, these Muslims, they're terrorists, they're the reason there are problems in the world and stuff. So they happened to use our sister at that time quite conveniently to spin their story. And I get a feeling, and this is just my opinion, this is not, I haven't got specific evidence or anything for this, but I think what's happened is that they don't want her to speak, because she will know about what plans they were plotting in order to continue this war on terror, and as we know, it's a war on Islam. So I think this war on Islam, that was easier for them to spin without people talking about it. Now people are talking about it, but like I say, it's been, how long has it been now? And it's just, the situation just, it upsets me every time I really read anything about this, to be fair, because like you said, we just feel so helpless. I think the reason why there's a bit more media attention with it now is people were hoping that now that the Taliban and Americans leaving Afghanistan and Taliban becoming in charge, and the so-called America's supposedly leaving, they thought that this was an opportunity for them to ask for her release. But typically, no, that hasn't happened either. So people had an element of hope that maybe finally some no justice. She's going to get her justice in the next life. We're going to get our justice for how little we've been able to do for her. But really, it's just, I think that's one of the reasons why it's become a bit more prominent at the moment, and more people are doing protests and things like that, because the expectation has increased that maybe something can be done to get her released, inshallah.
That makes sense. But I mean, I think the important point, what JK said, was the fact that this is one case in thousands, if not millions. So we ask people, when we speak about Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, in fact, what we're talking about we're referring to all the sisters that are being oppressed around the world. But one thing I wanna say really is the fact that I know JK was alluding to the incident in the past where the Abbasid Khalif al-Mu'tasim Billah, when news came to him that the Romans had arrested and imprisoned one Muslim sister, one Muslim woman, and basically he led an army there and he freed her. And there's even incidents you guys might remember at the time of the Messenger Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when a woman was in a marketplace and she was sort of like kneeling over, and someone from I can't remember which tribe it was. They sort of put a nail into her clothes into the ground. So when she got up, sort of clothes ripped off, and there was an incident, and that tribe was banished. So what we can see is that history testifies how we have dealt with these type of issues in the past. But what I want to ask, and I think is worth discussing, because of the fact that people are frustrated because everybody wants to do something. I mean, I received a message, I think a few days ago, about a certain petition somebody wanted me to join. But the thing is what is, if we're gonna ask the actual honest and sincere question, what are the options? What can we do? Not just for Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, for all, to protect all the honor of all the Muslim women around the world. What is it in this day and age we can do? Are these protests going to work? Is it going to work to try to take this case to the UN and stuff? What is it that we can actually do? What are the options? What do you guys think? Because that's what people are asking, right?
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I think there's positives in raising awareness, not just of Aafia Siddiqui, but by raising awareness of her case. I know quite a few people, especially from the younger generation, weren't aware of who she was,
Right.
which is a bit surprising. But that's probably because we grew up in the 9/11 generation, if you want to call it. So we kind of know her case quite well. But because this case has also been highlighted on TikTok and Instagram and all of these new platforms, it's quite good that some of the youngsters are asking, I never knew about the case of Aafia Siddiqui, and I think that's positive. And also it highlights not just that case, but also that the hypocrisy of the US, of who claim to be guardians of freedom and those who protects women's rights, and they're the ones that claim that they have innocent until proven guilty. They have all of these mottos and all of these values, apparent values, and they're the ones that don't live up to these standards. So again, it's positive that that's being raised to say, look at the hypocrisy of the US. Those who are claiming that the Taliban are against women's rights, those that are claiming that they need to go and invade lands to help women and their rights and all of this. But what about the case of Aafia Siddiqui and many sisters like her? So I think there's a positive in raising awareness, and I wouldn't belittle that. And I'm not saying you are, to be fair. I'm just saying that's one step, but that's the more important point. That is one action that we can take, is raise awareness. But to be fair, that's all it really does. It raises awareness of the case. I think then it's important then to ask, okay, so what is the solution to not just Aafia Siddiqui, but the solution to protect the honor of every Muslim sister in across the Muslim world, across whether it be even in these lands that, the other day we heard about that sister who was brutally killed in the streets. I think she was Muslim. Yeah, I believe she was Muslim. Sabrina Nessa. So there's a need for justice, and there's a need for protection of women all over the world, especially our Muslim sisters. So we have to look at the solution in a broader sense, not just one case. And I pray that Aafia Siddiqui is released and given her freedom, but that's just one case. That doesn't solve the problem. So this is the way we should look at it. How do we, broadly speaking, how do we ensure that all of our sisters are protected and the honor of our sisters are protected across the globe? And that is where we need to look at the actions of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, what he would have done. If you go back to your case that you just spoke about, of the sisters whose cloak was nailed to the ground, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam sent an army or he basically took an action to banish them, like you said. Mu'tasim, he sent an army to save the sister who was dishonored and imprisoned and kidnapped. But if you look into it a bit deeper, how is it that they were able to do this? The reality is that even in the time of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, during the Meccan phase, sisters were being dishonored. Sumayyah was being dishonored. The family of Yasir was being dishonored. There were women that were being dishonored, but the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wasn't able to take a decisive action in the sense of solve it there, right there and then. he told Sumayya to have patience because Jannah was waiting. But the difference was that when he had an authority, when he had a state, that's when he was able to take that decisive action and stop the harm of our sisters. And the same with Mu'tasim. He was able to send an army because he had this army at his disposal. And I think the story goes that when the sister called out to Mu'tasim, the response of the enemies was, what is he going to do? Send an army of black and white horses? I don't know if this is true, but it's people say this. I'm not sure how true it is and how authentic it is. But he said, will he send an army of black and white horses? And Mu'tasim, when he heard this, he sent an army of black and white horses because he was able. So my point here, long-winded point, but my point here really is that if we go back to these events in history, the only way the sisters were protected when one incident of dishonor happened was via a state, via having an army at their disposal. And again, we need to ask ourselves, how do we get back this level of authority and this level of protection for not just our sisters, but for every Muslim in the world?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think Cam, you want to make a point, bro?
Yeah, I think the brothers have said most of the main points, but I just wanted to mention, from a political perspective, it shows how weak, firstly, the Taliban are, if they are a legitimate if they came into power legitimately, i.e. through their own self-accord and not through the West, that the fact that they didn't use her case as a means to fight back at the media that were calling them out on women's rights. If they were clever enough, they would have thrown it back in their face, the Western media, and started shouting out Aafia Siddiqui's name and just reeling out all the abuses that she's had over the past 20 years in prison. So the fact that they don't use any of this, it just shows either they're just naive or they're just been told what to say, and they know what their boundaries are. The other thing is even how weak Pakistan are over this many years and all this leverage that they could have used against the Americans to raise her case and show that they're like we're saying, their justice doesn't really exist in America. It's just all say so, really, or all these freedoms and ideals that they stand for. So just the fact that a lot of these governments that the Muslims look up to, even with the recent Taliban coming into power, a lot of Muslims look up to them, see them as like, oh, it's not just it's better than having obviously the US occupation, but they actually see them as this is like a right step in the direction of Islamic revival. So the fact that even then they're not using these sort of ammunition against the West, it just shows that they're weak and they're really not ready to really take on obviously the West or any of the enemies in their region. So I think that's one point. And the other point is, I think the reason it's became so big recently is because she was brutally attacked recently. This is before even the Taliban came into power. Just before that, I think about a week or two or a month before that, she was brutally attacked, and the penitentiary, the place where she's being kept, released a statement saying that. So that's why before that nobody knew if she was even alive yet.
Right.
So the fact that sort of confirmed that she's actually still alive, because people have been asking, even the family and stuff have been asking for phone calls or something, because they've denied everything and they don't give any access to information on her. So people assume she was dead, and then obviously they have to release a statement, because when someone's brutally attacked like that, that's part of their regulations. They have to release a statement, and that's when her story came back to life. And then obviously after Taliban came in, then that's given it a different spin as well. So that's why it's been quite prominent.
But you mentioned Pakistan and you mentioned the government, and so this was actually one of the election promises that Imran Khan was using actually during the elections. But obviously it didn't materialize. But I think what it boils down to, I agree with JK, and just to make it clear, I wasn't belittling any type of activism. What I think is important is we speak about this, and certainly, I mean, the example JK gave, the fact that there's a younger generation who's unaware of this, so we need to speak about this. But only thing I would add, is that generating awareness is something which you have to do. However, the awareness shouldn't just end with what's happening. It should then continue in regards to what is it that we need to do, what must happen, even though at that particular moment that can't happen. But nevertheless, it has to be clear for people to visualize how would we get out of this situation. Because here we're talking about Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, right? One sister, and the sisters who have been oppressed or raped or whatever's happened to them. But what we want to do is, ideally, we don't want to bring about a situation where, you know, we can free our sisters. We want to bring about a situation where this can't happen in the first place. You understand? So if you look at the whole situation where, you know, we're talking about rulers of the past, JK gave some examples. Here, she was given by the Pakistani government, that minister, as JK mentioned, he acknowledged my lowest point was the fact that when we gave the innocent Dr. Aafia Siddiqui to the Americans, and it was for money, because even in the autobiography of Musharraf, he mentioned, he said, we have captured 689 and handed over 369 to the United States. And he's talking about the people that they classified as terrorists. We have earned bounties totaling millions of dollars. Those who habitually accuse us of not doing enough in the war of terror on terror should simply ask the CIA how much prize money it has paid to the government of Pakistan. So the issue is greater in the sense that, you know, not only do we not have the correct leaders in place to protect the Muslims and to protect their honor. In fact, what we do have are people who are actually put there to do the total opposite. So the only thing I would say is, yes, definitely we have to generate awareness. We have to speak about this. However, I do believe that the awareness has to be linked with a clear understanding of what is required. Otherwise, people will then do things which are actually not going to bring about any result, whether it's going to human rights organizations, whether it's going to the UN, whether it's lobbying your local MP or going to 10 Downing Street. These things are not going to solve the problem. So I think that's one thing I would say, JK, in regards to, yes, spread the general awareness. However, it's key that we explain what is it that needs to be done.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And even though, you know, Cage do some really good work in highlighting some of these issues, but one thing, I think, you know, they talk about individual cases, and that's well and good. But it is important for us to step back a bit and try and understand, okay, how do we solve the situation in its entirety? And like you said, how do we create an environment where this doesn't occur in the first place, rather than a reactive environment where we're having to react to these incidents and seek justice? How do we create a situation and environment where this just doesn't happen, because we have enough protection for our sisters and brothers, to be fair?
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. Let's make dua that Dr. Aafia Siddiqui is released and sort of reunited with her family as soon as possible. And and this test that she mentioned in the account of her dream with the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that if this is a test for the Ummah, then it looks like we're not doing really well in it. And inshallah ta'ala, hopefully we can up our game and be worthy of those who have contributed even a tiny bit in the Islamic revival, in the honor of protecting the honor of their sisters and so on and so forth. Okay, so got just two more segments, brothers. I want to quickly go through stuff that's happened in the last week or so, which I think is worth covering and getting your views on. The first one is the interesting news about the AUKUS Pact. That's how you pronounce it. This was the sort of, it's announced as a historical security pact in the Asia Pacific between UK, United States, and Australia. And the way it's seen as a pact, a security alliance, which is there to counter China, right? So what in this pact, it will allow Australia to build nuclear-powered submarines and using technology which is provided by the US. But the main issue I want to mention here is the fact that it goes to show, I think there's a saying, one of you guys will definitely mention it at some stage, that we don't have, I think allies, we have only interests, something like this. But what it's shown is that the French have really been stabbed in the back here, because the French had their own deal, which was torn up by the Australians, which was actually worth 27 billion pounds, 31 billion euros, which was to build 12 submarines. So the French have come out and said, look, this really is a stab in the back, and they've even recalled some of their ambassadors to these countries. So there's been a lot of hoo-ha, there's been a lot of tension, and I just thought I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because at the end of the day, what you're seeing here, NATO members, people that are supposed to be allies, but the French have, been burnt in this instance, and it seems like there's a lot happening to France, because we speak about France quite a lot on this show. I just want to get your thoughts on it. What do you guys think?
So one of the interesting things about this, I think it highlights a number of like geopolitical dimensions to what's going on in the world. I think America realizes that the threat of China is, obviously, we know this is quite an obvious statement to make, but it sees the threat of China as being one of the biggest threats. And it also highlights the issue of the South China Sea. So in the South China Sea, Chinese dominance has been continuing to grow over many years now, and even that has caused some issues between China and kind of Australia as well. So America sees that as a problem and has put that at a higher priority than potentially her, allyship with some of the European powers. And it also links to the fact that, Britain or England and stuff, Britain being outside of the EU now, it's an opportunity for America to use her, her lapdog, and Australia similarly, to carry out some of its plans against China. So what it's allowed them to do is say, okay, let's do this pact. Let's arm, basically arm Australia with nuclear and with all the facilities to be able to be the front line for them against China. And China themselves have come out and said, you know what, the fact that you're coming to this deal with America means that the first soldiers or the first people that will die will be yours. That's the threat made to China. So
to Australia.
Clear that, as in yes, absolutely, the threat that China made to Australia.
Yeah.
So it's clear that this was always something against China, even though they won't outright say that. And then just quickly is that, and it highlights the fact that from the French point of view, like you say, they had this deal with Australia. They're clearly not happy about it, and it's actually quite a significant move to actually pull your ambassadors out. That's not something that happens between allies. It's very rare that you get allies pulling their ambassadors out of another ally's lands, because it's seen as quite a drastic step. So clearly they were not happy about it. But at the same time, France is kind of tied into the EU bloc, and for that reason, what more can it really do other than be a bit disappointed about it? Because even today, I think the latest on this is that there has been some discussions again between France and America, and whilst France is not happy, America still hasn't even apologized. They've just said, well, maybe we should have told you. That's the best that America could offer. So it highlights to me that America know what her priorities are, and one of her major priorities is China and the South China Sea, and it's just carrying out, like you said, what is in its most, it's in its main interest. And on that note, it's decided to put together this security pact, and using the UK is quite easy now, because UK needs all the friends it can get after what's happened with Brexit.
Yeah.
The thing with one of the, as Rash is saying, there's quite a few dimensions to this, but one of the key reasons the US has done this and try to isolate France is primarily due to the way the US views China versus the way France views China. So and the strategy towards China as well as the kind of Asia Pacific Sea, that region. With the US strategy, Indo-Pacific area, the US strategy towards China is quite confrontational, because they're viewing China as this rising power, and obviously see them as a threat to their dominance. So what the US really want to do in this strategy in this region and against China is to maintain the existing international order. Basically, the US continuing to dominate and being long-term superpowers of the world. And that's why when Biden, when he did his speech on AUKUS, he spoke about, he didn't name China. It was very clear that he's talking about China when he said the importance of updating our alliances to better meet the threats of today and tomorrow. AUKUS is about making sure we have a modern capability to defend against rapidly evolving threats in the region, meaning China. There's no other threat there except for China. And Mike Pompeo made it even clearer, who's his basically right-hand man. He said, actually, he used to be the right-hand man under Trump. But what he said very clearly is that China and the Communist Party represents today's fundamental challenge to the free world, meaning the US dominance. And he said that China's actions threatens the prosperity of people. And basically, he was saying that the truth is, do you want to have a safe century, like safe future, or do you want a Chinese century, which is the dreams of President Xi Jinping? So that's the US stance towards China. The US is very confrontational. They view China as a threat, and China also has doesn't look at the US as allies really. Whereas France and the European Union, their position is very much more cooperative. They want to cooperate with China and Russia as well. And the EU High Representative Josep Borrell, he even said that it's not about confrontation, it's about cooperation. Our strategy is about cooperation, not confrontation. So this agreement between Australia, US, and the UK, AUKUS, is basically sending a message to both France and the EU to tell them that you guys are not part of this basic deal of us facing China and facing this threat to the world. And this also is on the back of the French really pushing for a military that is separate from NATO, a EU military, which both Trump and Biden were against, and the US are against. Obviously, they want to continue the position of NATO and having NATO allies that kind of basically secure US interests. Whereas France and the EU are pushing for a separate entity, which they say would work in cooperation with the NATO, but essentially it is separate, and it comes back to Macron's basically what he said in 2019 was that NATO is basically brain dead. It was meant to be for the attacking the Soviet Union. Soviet Union no longer exists. So what is it there for? So obviously this is the US sending a message to France to say, look, you're not part of the party anymore. So yeah, that for me, that is one of the key reasons why this AUKUS happened. Obviously, there's more to be said about China, but from the French perspective, I just wanted to mention those bits, really showing why the US are trying to sideline France as a major player.
Yeah, some top points so far. Cam?
Just to add on to what JK said, really, I agree fully with what JK said. Even in 2019, there was a $30 billion deal with France and China to buy the Airbus planes rather than the Boeing planes from US, and that really cheesed off the Americans at the time, because obviously the Boeing planes are seeing a massive decline, and their planes are all grounded around the world at that point, so they were having major issues and they needed a sale. And that's when the French came in and did the sale instead, and that really annoyed the Americans, as well as all the like Jake was, the cooperation with China and Russia from Europe, not just France. That's really upset America over the years as well, and they're seeing America now push back, even with the recent Afghanistan pullout. The fact that they pulled out so quickly, like I think we mentioned on another podcast, is that was purely to show to them Europeans that, look, without the Americans, you guys are in deep trouble, or we can just pull out whenever we want without even consulting you. And so that you've got Taliban in power now, so that's your fault. That's your fault for not being in, playing along with the game that we've set out, i.e. the chessboard that we have set out, and trying to go against it. And that's why they're getting hurt big time. And the other point was that UK are actually the only European country that have resisted Chinese sort of economic, I don't know what you'd call it, where they're trying to bring in their sort of trade deals. So, for example, the nuclear station, that was a massive one that the UK sort of stalled and said, no, we're not having it.
Huawei.
There was
5G as well, yeah.
Yeah, Huawei.
Yeah, the 5G, yeah. So the UK actually have been basically towing America's line and being on the side of the Americans all this time, and that's why they're getting the benefits of it. And it might not, I don't believe that it's a sort of a thing whereby now it means UK are now going to be, a superpower or whatever, or Brexit it was good for UK. It's none of that. It's purely political. It's purely just to show the Europeans that, look, these guys did what we asked of them, and that's why they're going to get the bit of the pie, and you aren't. And if you continue in the way you're doing, then you're going to be hurt further by the Americans. So it's purely political at the moment.
It ties back to, I think you made a point a while ago, of how Brexit was something that the US were really pushing, and probably even through kind of covert means actually allowed to happen with what's his name? I forgot his name now. The Brexit guy. His name?
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage and all of that. It was really pushed by the US, and now it's coming to light how it's in the interest of the US really getting Britain to leave, because France remains the only real military power in the EU now. The rest don't really have as much of a military, and Britain used to be, but no longer. Obviously, they're not part of the EU anymore. So it really is bringing to light some of the stuff that happened in the last few years.
Yeah,
and it also highlights that in the background there's a lot more to, like the whole of Brexit thing. People just assume there's like the front of it. A lot of it is to do with immigration and things like that. But there's a lot of other political layers to these type of things that the common person, isn't often aware of, and they only come to light, like you say, in these geopolitical events that may not be known at the time.
I think I mentioned in a previous one, I can't remember where I mentioned it now, but I know I mentioned it somewhere, that even the Britain making their recent HMS Elizabeth, or one of their massive war carrier ships, you'd only make when you're sort of positioning yourself for a major war. They started that project before they even left Brexit. So that showed that their foresight was thinking they're going to leave Brexit, then they're going to be able to use this, because as part of the EU, you would have never been able to use that warship without any sort of cooperation with the other EU powers around you. The only time that would ever be any useful for you if you was an independent power like America, for something that as big as that. So the fact that they started that before the Brexit even happened showed that this was always on the cards. And then obviously we saw all the funding that went into it, and all sorts of American intelligence that went into it as well. So I think there was more to it than meets the eye.
It even justifies, spending on Trident and stuff like that, which they've struggled to justify to the masses pre-Brexit. Now, when they can highlight the Chinese threat, all of a sudden that justification of 30 billion or whatever that goes out of the taxpayers' pockets is more justified than ever before.
Yeah, guys, just got a question or a comment coming. Let me just play this, yeah?
Yeah, guys, this must have been an earlier point that you guys made, but I had to go for a quick minute. So you guys were talking about China being a threat to the US and potentially rivaling them as a world hegemon. But tell me what you guys think about this. But there are some political scientists and international relations specialists who make the counterpoint that first, for China to be a world hegemon, there needs to be a regional hegemon within the South Sea region. And of course, you've highlighted instances where they've gained more dominance or restored their prior dominance, because obviously China has been a major world power throughout most of its time. However, a lot of the surrounding nations to China, be it Vietnam, Japan, the Philippines, are highly resilient to China's dominance, relatively speaking. So I wonder what you guys think about that. For instance, the fact that Japan is still a major naval power within the region, which is, at this current point in time, is what you really need to remain a world hegemon. Case in point with the US. But yeah, so a lot of the conclusion really from a lot of, well, not a lot, I don't know if it's a majority or consensus really, but some that I've heard is that in order for the China to again to be a world hegemon, it needs to be a regional one, and that's highly contentious for China right now because again they still have quite what's it called they have fairly sizable rivals, be it economically or militarily, especially since especially Japan, because Japan is starting to militarize a lot more, understandably so. So yeah.
Any thoughts, guys? Come.
I think, we definitely agree that China are not currently a superpower, because we know when there's two superpowers, they naturally will clash militarily, and they're not currently clashing. China have always played what the Americans call the gray zone strategy. They play within the boundaries of the rules that America have set out, and they try small gains, small wins. They have had quite a lot of small wins in the South China Sea recently, and that's really upset America. So a lot of the smaller islands have been taken over by China. And recently, obviously, Japan has always been an American agent sort of country since the war. And they have been militarized through the Americans and even trained through the Americans over the years. So Japan have always been sort of the first line of defense for the Americans if China were to have any sort of military ambitions. So I would definitely agree that they're not a superpower at the moment. They're not even. I don't know about regional superpower, regional hegemonies. I have not heard of that, but they're definitely within their region. They are probably they're definitely the most powerful country within their region. But whether that means anything, that doesn't really mean much unless you're militarily sort of more powerful than everyone in your region. I don't think China have ever shown any sort of military prowess to go and take over the world through military might and force like the Americans have. They're more of a trade sort of country. They do trade and infrastructure. They're building the one road, one belt policy. That's going to basically be a trade route from China all the way through to the Middle East into Europe, basically the old Silk Road back in the days. So this has always been sort of China's game plan, was to take over or gain more power through economy, not through military means. So, but that still threatens the Americans. So that threatens the Americans because America are a capitalist nation, and when another country is threatening the sort of the global capital base, then obviously that's going to upset them, and they're going to try and counter that. So I think that's where the battle is happening at the moment. I don't think it's a military battle at the moment.
Yeah, just to add to that, I totally agree with what Cam just said there, and I think that's the key point, that it's not so at the moment China are making military gains in that region, and they're an independent nation. They're an independent power. So that's what's causing some of the friction here, because they're taking actions and they're making economic gain, which basically means that America get less of the cake at one point, and then in the longer term, because the US will look at this long term. They're not looking at it in the immediate. In the immediate, China are nowhere near being a superpower, but they're making inroads that the US are looking at and seeing that these guys are taking action that will allow them to continue. If they continue in that trajectory, that will give them hope that they will potentially have power in the future, and that's why some of these countries that the brother was talking about, Japan and I think even Taiwan and even India, they've actually formed an alliance with the US, which is called the Quad Group, who basically form together to kind of think about initiatives that can go against China and the economy, and be a competitor to the Chinese projects, including the One Belt One Road project. So as Cam has been saying, I think it's not as though China are on the brink of becoming a superpower, but the US see it as a threat, and they want to quell that threat as much as possible, so that there's no chance of China gaining that position.
In regards to China being a regional power, definitely it is. I think what Cam touched upon is valid, that China's never really had global ambitions. However, what we can see is that this definitely has economical ambitions, and the more it spreads from an economic point of view, then its military has to be brought up to a level where it can protect its assets around the globe, wherever it is. So definitely that's a threat. What I would say also is, for a superpower you'd have to say that they are very ideological in the sense like there's also the sense that they have the ideology which they want to spread to the rest of the world. So I wouldn't say that the clash between America and China is an ideological one, even though the Chinese come across as a communist state. They're actually not a communist state. If you look into it, they're a hybrid between communism and capitalism. So from an ideological aspect, I don't see a clash. But certainly, like I'm saying, America doesn't want to share. It doesn't want to share what it has with anyone, and certainly not the Chinese. So hence why it has to sort of hit back. I'm just gonna play this comment, Rash, then I come to you. Yeah.
You're right. China's always fairly been inwardly in terms of its ambitions, because they obviously have a lot of room to play in, right? And yeah, you're right. I mean, sorry, I should have clarified. So, what they were saying is like, I saw like an ironclad rule is that in order for you to be a world hegemon, you have to be a regional hegemon, because if you're dominant, like for example, say look at the United States, like within the North American region, they have no real rivals. Mexico, Canada, the Caribbean, Central America states, then they're not really showing any inkling of rivalry towards the US. Whereas in China, even though China might be the most dominant power, I don't think it's the dominant by a major margin. Like, you know what I mean? So I think that's the point being made.
Rush, want to come on that one?
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think Michael made a few good points there. So it is a good way to look at it, because, like you say, for you to have dominance across the globe, you clearly need to have some dominance in your region. But I think another way to look at it, and whatever some of these political scientists and commentators say, another way to look at it is look at these projects like that US are carrying out, and look at all of the anti-China kind of policies many of the nations of the world are now trying to be more involved in. That means they see China as a threat. So you don't need just to say that China, okay, just because it's got a threat on its doorstep, like whether it be Japan or whether it be Vietnam and places like that. Regardless of that, the fact that it has the ambitions and the superpower of the time, America, sees it as a threat is sufficient for us to know that they want to increase that. And we look at things like spending on defense budget and stuff like that as an indicator to where the trajectory of a nation goes.
They're catching up.
And then when you look specifically at the South China Sea, they've been working there, creating land there, they've created their own islands there, where they've put like many what's it called, defense like artillery and things like that there, which like the likes of America are not happy at all, but they see that as their kind of backyard, so that regardless of some of the other nations locally that they may disagree with, they still know they are the power of the region, and they see America as the threat themselves. So for them to be able to continue to expand, they need to compete with America, which they are doing, but in different ways. I think often we just assume, because we've seen America as the superpower of the last 50 years or however long, that their strategy has been more of a invade and conquer type of strategy, whereas China's strategy is different. Like we've already probably said, China's strategy is more kind of economical, but also it takes a slightly different approach. I think Cam used a good phrase, I can't remember that, about the grey zone, I think he said, because that approach is that there's many countries, like I'll give you a good example, Pakistan and the likes of Bangladesh and places like that. For instance, Imran Khan, when there was recently this Uyghur Muslims issue, he chose not to say anything and said, look, we believe the Chinese version of events. He's supposed to be standing up for Muslims, and he completely sold out to the Uyghur Muslims. Why? Because they have interests with China. So this is the strategy that China takes, is where it's trying to create these friends in the area that can continue their goals or help them with their goals, and that's a different approach to the approach that America takes, where it just previously has just gone into places and bombed them to the Stone Ages. So again, just because they take different strategies doesn't mean that they're not both aspiring, or one is a superpower and another one is an aspiring superpower.
Yeah, some really valid points, man. Some really valid points. Just a wary of time. What I would say is that in regards to this issue to do with AUKUS and France, one thing I did want to sort of get in before we end is definitely you're right. The main issue here is targeting China. But I would say also is that one thing we see with France is that for a while now, I think they are kind of living in the past. They remember their glory days when they were a world power. And I think that, to try to relive those moments, they do come up, their interests do clash with those of America. And I do feel that, whether it's calling for the European army, whether it's calling NATO brain dead, which is basically America's tool, we see that what America is doing now, in a way, is it's not a stab in the back. It's more a slap in the face, and trying to show them that, look, this is what your position is. You're beneath us, and this is where you're going to remain unless you make certain changes.
The thing is,
yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. The thing is, Maj,
No.
do you think that America didn't think how France was going to feel about this? They didn't sit there and go, "Oh, damn, we forgot to mention this to France."
Exactly.
These guys analyze and have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. What if this nation reacts like this, etc., etc. They knew that regardless of how France feel, and they knew they would feel like this, that they still went ahead because they checked what that fallout was going to be, and they said it was still worth it, and they proceeded. So we shouldn't be naive to thinking that these nations don't plan in advance and be prepared for these situations, which is why they're now speaking to them again and trying to resolve the issue.
But I think they would have to do that as well, Rash, because at the end of the day, America can't be seen as just totally just destroying, a fellow ally, and they've got historical links. Remember even the Statue of Liberty. Where does that come from? That came from France. They have historical ties. So America has, like you said, they've dealt with them. They've slapped them. They've, I want to. There's another term that comes to mind, but I'm not going to say. So they sort of slapped them down. But now it's like, okay, let's talk about this. They put them in their place. They've achieved what they want to do in regards to showing China that, listen, we mean business. But now it's a case of, okay, let's sit down now. Let's discuss. What's the problem? You're like a psychiatrist. What's the problem?
The other thing, just kind of my final point on this. One of the positives from a Muslim perspective is that these Western nations, although they might unite in their hatred for Islam, they have differences. They have division between them, and not only as this AUKUS deal shown a division between America and France, but it's also shown a difference between nations of the European Union. So publicly, a lot of the European Union nations came out and showed solidarity with France and sympathy for France, but actually behind the scenes in private, many of them didn't agree with France, and they said, and I think there's I forgot his name, but there was a European parliamentarian who said that we can't act as though nothing's happened, but actually the way the EU will react is not decided unilaterally by Paris, meaning that Macron and the Paris and France has had some problem with America, and like you said, there's some historic reasons for that as well. But actually, it's showing that the EU don't always agree with what France does, and France doesn't represent the EU. So it shows there are cracks between the surfaces for the West. They might be united in the hatred for Islam, but there are divisionary lines there that can be utilized by the Muslims in the future. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that, you may think that they are united, but their hearts are divided. And that's because they are people who don't reason. So it shows to us that the enemies of Allah, they might act as though they are united on one force, but actually they do have divisions between them, and only Islam is the deen that unites people truly. Whether and you can look at our history, how we've united continents in one, and there has been no differences whether you're Turk, whether you're Arab, whether you're African, or whatever it may be. So that was another point really showed to me that this AUKUS deal and deals like this show the cracks between the surface between the Western nations.
No, very important point. Very important point, which we need to remember, because at this moment of time, it looks like we are the most disunited people in the world, but in fact, we have a lot more in common than we have differences. But a lot of the world has a lot less in common and actually more differences. So time will tell. Time will tell. Brothers, if there's is any final comments before we sort of bring this to a close?
No, I think that was a good point, really good point by JK for people to reflect on. Probably a good point to end on, really.
Yeah. Okay, no problem, inshallah ta'ala. For all those listening, just to mention that this podcast will be uploaded to the Islamic Vibes podcast and also to the Path to Revival YouTube channel. So if you want to check it out and if you find it beneficial, share it with family and friends. First of all, a big jazakallah khair to the panel. It's always a pleasure. And a big thanks to everyone listening, and also to everyone who sort of contributed with their comments, questions. It made things a bit more interesting. So yeah, jazakallah khair, guys, and hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, see you guys on the next one.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.